All right, let's head on over to northeastern Syria, where a Turkish military incursion is on hold, at least for now. The pause took effect on Thursday after a U.S. delegation met with Turkey's President Recep Erdogan over in Ankara. But today, there are new reports of continued violence in the region. RT's Sayeh Tavangar is live in the newsroom. She's following all the details. Sayeh?
That's exactly right, Manila. Just hours after that ceasefire agreement, today there are already numerous reports that Turkey continues to attack Kurdish fighters in the border town of Ras Al Ain in northern Syria. Now, speaking to journalists earlier today, Turkish President Recep Erdogan shrugged off those claims. Take a listen.
Friends, I don't know where you're getting the news from, but the news I got from my Minister of Defense, there is no question of clashes. This is all speculation, disinformation. Please, let's not pay any attention to this disinformation, and let's strengthen the step we are taking now.
Now, Erdogan went on to say that his military offensive will proceed in a more determined way if Syrian Kurdish fighters don't pull out from the areas by the end of the 5-day ceasefire. He also said he had no problem if Syrian government forces, which are backed by Russia, return to the areas that cleared of the Kurdish fighters. Now, that 5-day ceasefire window is to allow withdrawal of Kurdish forces from a designated area. Now, Turkey's aim is to clear fighters they see as terrorists from a so-called deep safe zone, which is about 20 miles between Syria and Turkey. Now, the Kurdish political leader welcomed the ceasefire, but says he will not accept a Turkish occupation since they feel that the Turks got exactly what they wanted in the first place, the removal of Kurdish-led forces from the border. Now, Manila, also today, the UN is investigating the alleged use of white phosphorus in Syria. Now, this information first reported by the Kurdish Red Crescent, which claims 6 people, some of them civilians, are being treated with the mysterious burns.
Now, Sayeh, what about back here in Washington? How are the lawmakers reacting to this news of the ceasefire?
Well, as you recall, President Trump hailed the agreement as a great day for civilization, but a lot of critics like Senator Lindsey Graham slammed the deal, declaring Trump's action on Syria will stand a blood stain on U.S. history. Now, in fact, just hours after the ceasefire was announced, Senator Graham introduced a sanctions bill, which, by the way, has bipartisan support that would go far beyond the economic penalties President Trump had imposed. Now, the legislation would target President Erdogan's personal finances and sanction the Turkish armed forces, among other entities. Now, Graham said the sanctions are needed not just to fix the situation in Syria, but because China, Russia, and Iran are all watching and need to be told that they cannot act with impunity. Reporting in the newsroom, Sayeh Tavangar, RT.
All right, for more on this fragile ceasefire, let's turn now to former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. So, Jim, despite this announcement by Mike Pence yesterday, those on the ground along the Turkish-Syrian border, they are reporting that there's intermittent artillery fire, clashes on the ground. These have all continued. What do you make of that?
Well, whether it's a pause, as the Turks call it, or a ceasefire, as the Americans are calling it, I've never heard of any such thing that doesn't have a few hiccups along the way until sort of the lines of control are established and people back down. I'm not all that worried about it. In fact, the Turks are even denying that those clashes are taking place. You expect a little roughness as this takes hold. The question is, will anybody go beyond what I think is the basic choreography here, which is that the Kurds go back under Syrian government control, and then a modus vivendi is worked out with the Turks.
Okay, so this quasi-ceasefire, whatever we want to call it, is only between Turkey and the Kurdish, the YPG, the SDF, right? For right now?
Not exactly, because I think integral to the deal is that the Kurds are going to go back under Damascus control. I saw a picture just today of, for the first time in years, the Syrian military up at the Turkish border, re-raising the Syrian flag at the border checkpoint with Turkey. That's what it's really got to be about.
So what about the Syrian military or its Russian allies who are, as we know, like you just mentioned, they are in that region now for the first time in, you said, in a very long time. Could we see those groups using force against the Turks?
I think we could if the Turks get out of what I think is actually an agreement that was made well in advance of this operation. I don't think the Turks will do that. They have a lot to lose if they do that. I think the bigger problem is what happens here in Washington, that whether we just have American forces pulled out of the border region or out of Syria entirely. And this is where you get the pushback from Senator Graham and others who have never met a war they didn't like and never liked a peace, saw a peace that they liked where American troops are withdrawn. They want us to stay in there. It has nothing to do with ISIS and all that nonsense. It has to do with blocking the Russians and the Syrians and the Iranians.
Well, let's talk about that here in Washington, or as you like to call it, the swamp. How much of whatever transpired between Mike Pence and Erdogan, do you think a lot of that had to do with Trump's letter to Erdogan playing into this, given that, you know, we saw that or at least we heard that Erdogan trashed the letter after reading it? Right. Do you think there was a legitimate fear on his part that Trump could really decimate his economy?
No. I don't. Look, you've heard of the style of leadership where somebody looks around for a parade somewhere and then runs to the front and acts like he's leading it. I think that's what American policy is trying to do right now with President Trump's, I think, wise agreement to say, look, the Syrians, the Russians, and the Turks are working out a peace in northeast Syria that is integral to bringing this war to a close. The best thing we can do is get our American forces out of there, which is also Mr. Trump keeping his campaign promise, right, not to the swamp, not to these Republican senators, but to his own voters. And he's doing the right thing. I think the letter, I think sending Mr. Pence, Mr. Pompeo over, that's all eyewash to say, oh, we're really bringing this thing together here, when in fact all we're really doing is stepping out of the way and very wisely doing so.
I think that's a great analogy that you made with having the U.S. running ahead of this parade, yeah, and grabbing the baton and going, we're leading the parade.
And I'm sure Mr. Putin is happy to let us do that for a while until he puts together his own little Camp David kind of scenario with Mr. Erdogan on one side and Mr. Assad on the other side.
Yeah, as the grown-ups would do,
yes,
right?
As the grown-ups would do.
And as you and Mike Maloof talked about the other day. So let me ask you this final question. Is the U.S. role in the Middle East, is it diminishing, and should it be?
Yes, of course it should be. And I think it is in fits and starts. And again, that's why we're getting such hysterical pushback from the swamp. Look, it was at what, 1977, that President Carter declared this was a vital area of American interest.
And then why? The 1980 doctrine.
Yes, because we needed energy from that region.
Yes.
We don't need it anymore. Why are we so involved here? If there are problems between the Turks and the Iranians and the Syrians and others, rather than being the aggravating factor in all this and inserting ourselves in the middle of other people's fights, why are we there at all? And I think this is, again, I think what Mr. Trump said earlier is that we've spent trillions of dollars to do what in the Middle East? Getting involved in these wars is the worst mistake America has ever made, and I think he intends to correct it. And I think that's going to be essential for his reelection.
All right, we will see if your prediction, as they seem to always do, come true. So, Jim Jatras, thank you so much, as always, sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.